Good afternoon, good evening to all of you out there who are watching from our Redeemer. I am joined by Reverend Brian Lemcke, who is the pastor at Zion Lutheran Church in Delmont, South Dakota, a very close sister congregation to our Redeemer. We have a lot of members, former members in common with Delmont, people who moved in from Delmont, things like that. So a lot of connections there. And of course, Pastor, am I saying that right? Lemcke? Yeah?
Yes,
Pastor
yes.
Lemke is our secretary's father, Stephanie Shop. So we are blessed to have you here today. Thanks for joining us.
No, thanks for having me.
Great. Well, you know what we've been doing, as I kind of mentioned earlier, for the past couple of weeks. I've been doing this is the number of church workers in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod is falling off precipitously, and in my small way, I wanted to encourage maybe try to encourage other pastors and other people thinking about ministry that there are lots of various paths to get to be a pastor. There's not one right or wrong path necessarily, and to encourage that there's a lot of pastors serving out there who maybe took a circuitous route to the ministry, and also just to tell about some joys and some challenges to ministry that we have nowadays. So uh, being that as it may, Pastor Lemke, I would love to hear about. Could you talk to us a little bit about your story of the Lord calling you into ministry?
How far back do you want me to start?
Well, you know, why don't we start back when you? I think maybe what might be actually more helpful to anything would be when would be the first time you thought you kind of felt like, you know, maybe I think I'd like to be a pastor, or I kind of thinking about it.
9 years old, actually.
9 years old.
Yeah, and in fact, at that time, I carried a Bible with me everywhere I went. My brothers, it was the 70s, so my brothers called me a Jesus freak, you
Okay.
know. Um, and I told my mom I was going to be a that I was going to be a pastor, and she laughed at me when I
Really?
was 9 years old when I said that. Yeah, because she couldn't imagine someone in our family being a pastor, you know.
Now, what?
And
I don't know if that's a super touchy thing to talk about, but why would she not think anyone from your family could be a pastor?
we were from the other side of the tracks
Okay.
and not the good side.
Okay.
Um, the police department uh, had been at our house numerous times for my older brothers and sister.
So, was your family a family that was in church regularly?
Um, Not really.
How were I would assume then that you were someone who was in church regularly.
I was fairly regular. Church was in town, but it was on the opposite end of town from where we lived. So we're talking a little bit over a mile of a walk to
Mm-hmm.
get to church. Sometimes I would have friends pick me up to take me to church. Um, my parents were really good at dropping us off for Sunday school and picking us up after Sunday school, but not for church.
Hmm.
That's basically how it worked. I grew up in a household with an alcoholic father, and an enabling mother who just wanted peace in the family, you know. So, um, but yeah, it was an interesting road. In fact, when skip ahead a few years from when I was 9 years old,
Mm-hmm.
um, I completely dropped of the idea of being a pastor, and I started going the opposite way with friends who were not the friends that my parents would want me to have if they were if they were paying any attention at all. Really,
Okay.
I mean, I want to be as gentle with that as I can about my parents. My mom did the best she could under the circumstances. But by the time I was 10 years old, I was cooking my own meals. I knew how to cook by the time I was 10, 11 years old. I could cook just about anything that I needed. And I learned that from watching my mom cook when I was really young. I just kept watching her. And, and so I wasn't, it wasn't like I was starving to death, and it wasn't like my mom didn't try, but there were times when my dad, when he got off work, he would go straight to the bar, and and he wouldn't come home till 8 or 9 o'clock at night. Sometimes she would go down there just to be with him because, you know, she never got to be with him really. And so she would stay at the bar with him and bring him home.
Hmm. What? When did it start getting real for you? When did you start to really think about maybe? You said for a while there you were going kind of the opposite direction. When did things kind of turn back towards pastoral ministry?
When not quite a while later until our twins were born.
Oh wow!
That was in 1991. They're now 20. What are they? 29 years old.
So you were working somewhere else prior to being a pastor.
I worked several other places. Yes.
What kind of things
I
were you
worked.
doing?
Well, while I was in high school, I worked full time,
Okay.
which I think is illegal today. But
Probably yeah.
junior and senior years, I was working at least 40 hours a week plus going to school. And that was because if I needed something, I had to buy it myself. Okay. So I worked a couple of different things. I worked at an implement dealer setting up implement machinery, you know, combine heads and wagons and all kinds of different equipment. And then I would deliver it as well. And then I also worked at a gas station for about a year. And then I in a hospital nursing home situation in a nearby town that I was working in maintenance department. My senior year, I got out of school at noon because I didn't have any more classes. I had all my credits that I needed set up, but I had no classes in the afternoon. So I left at noon and went to work. And I worked in building maintenance until 4 o'clock. And at 4 o'clock, I went and worked in the kitchen.
Okay.
And worked until about 9 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night. So, yeah.
So you were working jobs in your community, taking care of your family, and then the twins come along and something changes.
Yep. Well, that only brings us up to a certain point. When my wife and I got married when we were 19, we met when we were 17. Different high schools, but we were both still in high school. And I worked in building. First, I went into the Air Force before we got married, and that didn't work out. I have one leg shorter than the other, so you know that was my career plan because I knew I wasn't going to college.
Right.
Okay. And so I got out of there, and a few months later got a job at the local hospital working in building maintenance, and I did that for about 4 years. And then I decided that, well, actually my boss decided and how he decided that for me was he told me I couldn't because I had a daughter. Stephanie was 18 months old when I started college. Not quite, she was just over a year, I guess. So I went to a junior college, which doesn't require all the testing to get in that's required. And once I got 1 year done, I decided, well, you know what, I'm going to stick with this and go 4 years. So I transferred to a 4-year college.
What college did you transfer to?
I transferred to Marshall, Minnesota, which now is Southwest State, I believe. No, it was Southwest State. Now it's Minnesota State University. And then the business area, I was a business major, and the head of the department became the head of the university, the state college system, not the university system. They're separate. And he was taking all of or almost all of the instructors in the business department with him
Yikes.
to be on his staff and to teach where he was going, which was in Minneapolis. And then we were told that we would be set back at least a year in our program. So then I transferred to Morris, Minnesota, which is the University of Minnesota.
Right.
Their liberal arts college, and emphasis on the liberal. When I went in there, I was a Democrat. When I came out, I was a Republican. I couldn't stand what they were doing. So anyway, so I started retail management, and I did that for 5 years. Worked for Shopco, which no longer is in existence, but they were really an up and coming company in the early 90s, late 80s.
Shopco was just down the street from us. We very much missed the fact that we missed them in Sioux Falls.
Yeah, they had a certain quality of store and merchandise that you don't get at Walmart. You know, they're kind of between the Target and Walmart type of thing, and so
I think
a little
that's
more
pretty
closer
accurate,
to the
yeah.
Target. And then after 5 years of retail management, I got a job. Well, first, I got a job working in an elevator, and I did that for about 8 months until they laid me off. And then I got a job with 3M in their engineering department as a technician. And my college degree is in economics, which is all statistics. And so I was doing statistical analysis, how we could increase the machine's capacity and reliability. Basically, it was called the Lights Out program. They wanted us to get the equipment to run so well that you could go in, turn everything on, shut the lights off, and go home. And they would run for an 8-hour shift at least. That was their goal. It was an interesting job.
So what year are we in right now? What year is this now when you're working for 3M?
This is 94.
94. Okay.
Yep. So our twins then were about 3 years old, and I'll back up to that in a minute to the ministry again. But then I worked doing that, and during that I also opened up my own auto repair shop and did that on the side. And so now to back up a few years, back to 1991, our twins were born 8 weeks premature, and they spent 5 weeks in intensive care in what used to be Sioux Valley. Now it's Sanford.
Right.
And my wife actually was in Sanford Hospital for 3 months in labor.
That's unusual.
Yeah, it's very unusual. She went into labor at 20 weeks, and weeks there was no viability for survival. It just wasn't. They weren't there yet. So she spent the next 3 months in the hospital having one contraction every 10 minutes. They even had to go as far as to sew her cervix shut so the babies couldn't be born.
My goodness.
So
I've never heard of such a thing.
Yeah, during that time.
So let me be clear. I think there was a cutout of the internet. I want to make sure we're on the same page.
Okay.
So they were very, very premature. The hospital couldn't handle them at the age they were, so she needed to go on bed rest and keep them in her womb until they were ready to be delivered.
Yes, and she had to stay at the hospital.
Okay.
I could go visit her at the hospital, but I couldn't hold her hand or touch her or anything.
Really?
Yeah, because that actually increases the intimacy of that increases labor.
Really?
So labor increases when you hold hands or whatever. And so she was there, and I was visiting every other day because I worked every other evening, in retail management. And our older kids, Stephanie, Jeremy, and Joshua, all three of them, they were 7, 5, and 3. I kept Stephanie at home because she had school.
Yep.
So I took care of her every day. And then she would actually go to our pastor's house in the small town we lived in when I worked the evening shift until 9 o'clock, and then I'd pick her up there. So they were very wonderful. And that's when I started back into the noticing, by understanding everything we were going through and how God was getting us through that, through our pastor, and increasing our faith and strengthening us. The pastor idea came back into my head, and I didn't mention it to my wife until about a year later. And I told her one night, I said, I really feel the call to become a pastor. And, she was fine with that. She said, good idea. Go ahead. You go to Fort Wayne, be a pastor, and I'm staying here with the kids. I said, no. I said, that's not how. I'm not going, because you have to be part of this. This is not just a me thing. You're going to be involved in a lot of stuff too. So, I kind of left it at that, and I didn't mention it a whole lot in the coming years. One day, we were still good friends with that pastor, Pastor Anthony. He's up in Deer River, Minnesota now, and so we were, I was talking with him off and on, and one Sunday, Michelle and I came home from church. This was in 1999. It was in probably March, and I had left 3M to go more continuously into my own business, and then took a side job with Coleman Powermate, where they made air compressors in a nearby town, doing their building maintenance and their machine maintenance for them. One day after church, Michelle and I were sitting there, and Pastor Anthony calls and talks to me for a little bit, and I told him what was going on in our life and all that stuff, and he said, "Wow, you've got a lot going on." And I said, "Yeah, it's kind of the way things are right now." And he said, "Well, let me talk to Michelle for a minute." So he talked to Michelle for a minute. I have no idea what they talked about. I didn't pay attention to anything. A lot of her answers to him were yeah and okay and things like that. So I don't know what they were talking about. I guess I've never asked. But anyway, the next Sunday, we came home from church, and I had a roast in the crock pot, and we were just sitting, relaxing in the living room for a little bit. And she looked at me and she said, "I think it's time." And I said, "What do you mean it's time? What does that?" Because I didn't know what she was talking about.
Right.
She said, "I think it's time for you to go to the seminary." I said, "Well, but I'm not going without you and the kids." And she said, "Yeah, we'll go with you." So I was on the phone the next day, calling the seminary, finding out what do I have to do, talking to my pastor, what do I have to do to, I need your recommendation. I found that out, and so, oh yeah, he was really excited to do that. And so that I went to the seminary. I went through summer Greek. They stayed in Minnesota while I did summer Greek, because I wouldn't have had time for them anyway,
Yeah.
And so she was the church secretary.
Was that back before they had the Hebrew requirement at Fort Wayne?
No, we still had Hebrew.
Okay.
Yep, we were required to take Hebrew too, but that was in the fall.
Okay.
So,
yeah, I was talking to, I think, another pastor a couple weeks ago, and he had mentioned that for a time there wasn't a Hebrew requirement at Fort Wayne. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I took the full Hebrew requirement as well, but the summer Greek, so they stayed in Minnesota, and I was I was there and doing what I had to do. So that's kind of the story of how I got there.
Where was your vicarage at?
My vicarage was interesting. What I did is I applied for and received the status of delayed vicarage.
Mm-hmm.
So I went my 4th year on vicarage.
Okay. Deferred?
My vicarage assignment was here in South Dakota.
Okay.
It was a triple parish over by Pierre.
What are the churches?
Hagar, Oneida, and Harold, South Dakota.
There you go.
Okay. There was no pastor there.
Mm-hmm.
So they were vacant while I did my vicarage.
Who was your supervisor then? A pastor in the Winkle or district president?
Yeah, pastor in the Winkle North up at Gettysburg. He was my supervisor. I met with him 3 whole times during the whole experience of vicarage. He came one time to watch me do a sermon.
Okay. That
was it. So
I've heard a couple of guys talk about their deferred vicarage as being similar. So
yeah. It was interesting. I kind of figured that this was the final test for me, because you don't send a vicar to a vacant triple parish unless you're planning on either getting him really good or killing him.
Yeah.
Because it's stressful. I preached more times. Actually, I think I hold the record, at least as far as Fort Wayne's concerned, of number of times I preached during my vicarage, which was 3 times every Sunday plus funerals.
Well, yeah. I was talking to Pastor Asher, and he had a similar experience because his supervisor pastor was a chaplain at the Pentagon, and he started his vicarage, I think, a month before, well, 2 or 3 weeks before September 11th happened.
Yep.
So he ended up being completely on his own too, and it's funny. I've talked to a lot of pastors now about their vicarage experiences, and it seems like everyone has a very different vicarage experience, and
sure.
I think that there is some. Well, of course, there's wisdom of the Holy Spirit. There's wisdom of the men who are in charge of these vicarages. They put people in the right places. It seems like most of the time.
Yeah. And I stayed there after my vicarage. In fact, I was the longest, I don't know what you call it, length of time for any pastor. 9 years I was there.
You were at that Tri-Point Parish for 9 years.
Yeah.
And then you took a call to Minnesota, is that right?
No, to Missouri.
Missouri.
Yes.
Where in Missouri were you?
Mound City.
I'm not familiar with where Mound City is. That's up north.
Do you know where
right?
St. Joseph is?
Yes.
Right on the interstate north of St. Joseph, 35 miles.
Okay. And
right
how long were you at Mound City?
I was there for 8 years.
Okay. And then that brings you up to date. Then from Mound City, you took the call to...
I took the call here to Delmont and Tripp, the dual parish. Yeah.
And you came in shortly after Delmont, shortly after design had been rebuilt. Is that correct?
Yes. In fact, I came. I was installed on the. Let's see. I was installed on the first of the year of 2019 or 2018. And in August of 2017 they dedicated the church. Their pastor left in, I think, June of 2017.
Right.
So.
Listening to your story, and it's got a lot of different stops along the way in terms of employment, then, I might ask this question, kind of delving a little deeper. I've known some people in the past who think that when they get to a certain age, they have to they maybe had thoughts about pastoral ministry. They considered doing pastoral ministry, but then they got to a certain age and they said to themselves, that part of my life is behind me. I'm too old to do that now. I can't do that now. How much you reply to them about that?
Well, age isn't the issue. Really, the issue. I went through seminary with several guys in their 60s. You know, when I came out and went on my vicarage, I was 39.
Mm-hmm.
I did my first funeral on my 40th birthday.
Right.
So I mean, I was compared to those older people, relatively young, but compared to someone that's 22 just coming out of
Right.
college, or someone that's 20 thinking of getting into the ministry, that's pretty old, you
Yeah.
know. So I don't, you know, when I think about the ministry, it's, you know, God gives each of us different tools, has us go through different situations to strengthen us for the ministry.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think there have been times where there have been certain things I've gone through my previous congregation or in life that were very much necessary to have gone through to do ministry here.
Yes.
Um, that's not always the case, though. I don't think every single guy has a single, has these things to point to necessarily. Sometimes ministry is just normal too, right? There's not just these, but
Yeah.
there are those times where you kind of realize you were being prepared for something.
Yes. Yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can point to this. I've not shared this, I think, very much, but my father always felt that he should have gone into the ministry, but he didn't. And he
Uh-huh.
very much had this mindset that he had gotten to a certain age and it was too late. There wasn't any time. He was too old to go back to seminary, and I think that our lives might have been very different had he gotten over that hump and realized that,
Right. Right.
and then I had I remember going to seminary with in fact, it was a difficult time because we had a guy who was in his mid 60s, maybe, yeah, like maybe late 60s. He was finishing up seminary, and it was when I was still at seminary. They found him in his room. He had passed away in his room,
Yeah.
and so a lot of us were kind of wrapped up in this thought of, what's it all mean? Why would someone finish three years of seminary and then die his fourth year in his room? What's the worth? Then we start talking about what's the worth of going to seminary if he never gets a chance to serve in God's church, and all these kind of things. And I've come to the understanding that we should never be looking at necessarily the numbers of years of service,
Right.
right? Like, I don't know if that's a valid statistic to say, well, this guy served 40 years, so his service is better than this guy who served 10 years. I mean, God puts people, the service is God's.
Yes.
The time is God's. He's going to put servants in that church to serve his people. Whether that
Right.
person serves 20 years or 10 or 5, it doesn't really matter. It's God's house. It's his service. These are his appointed servants.
And maybe his appointed service was just he needed to do something in his, oh, what did they call it? His fieldwork church.
Yeah. Or
I mean, we all had fieldwork churches where
yeah.
while we were in seminary, and maybe that was his mission that God had for him.
Or
We don't know.
Or perhaps it was someone that he touched along the way. You just don't know.
Right. Maybe one of the shut-ins at that congregation, or maybe another seminarian that needed some help, or whatever.
The angels in heaven rejoice over one person who repents and comes
Yes.
to faith, right? So God's discussion on value has very little to do with years and has everything to do with people touched by the gospel.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Not to say that long pastorship shouldn't be our goal, but I think there is a little bit of this, especially with the difficulty for raising funds for seminary the last 25 years or so. When the seminary has gone past this being funded by the synod, and now we're kind of funding it by fundraising. I think there's a lot of questions. Well, is it right to spend all this money educating a guy who's only going to serve maybe 10 years? Is that right? And boy, I don't know if that's a really great question to be asking. Because you might spend a lot of time educating this 20-year-old, 25-year-old guy to be a pastor, and Jesus might come tomorrow. So,
right. Right.
Where's all your planning then? Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
well, I appreciate
one of my one of my classmates, I think it was a classmate, either that or he was a year behind me, but I had several classes with him. He was killed in a car accident pulling out of his driveway in Fort Wayne, while we were there.
And how old was he?
Oh, he was probably 35. I think he had 3 or 4 kids.
So not an old man by any
No,
any
not old by any means.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let me that's kind of a difficult story to end on. Let's maybe shift gears for a minute and
Sure.
Your story is very interesting, by the way, and it went a lot of. It was a good story. I appreciate you sharing with me. Thank you. I'm curious, what do you think are the greatest challenges in ministry right now? And you can think of in terms of your local congregation or just in general. The floor is yours. It's wide open.
The biggest challenge I see is getting people, even people, especially people who claim to be Christian but they're not going to church, getting them to realize the need for corporate worship and the need for the sacraments. I've got several members who don't come to church, and they've never been in church since I've been here. I'm told some of them haven't been in church for 20, 30 years. To me, and they see no need to go to church, and their parents are frustrated. One of these people is 60 years old, and his 80-year-old mother, in fact, comes to your congregation in the wintertime. She's just an all-time wanting to be in church getting communion. And she's one of them that's wondering why we aren't doing communion every Sunday here. So.
No, I'll share an anecdote with you. I ran into someone out in the community, and they saw my collar and they were asking where I served, and I said, well, I'm the pastor at Our Redeemer Lutheran Church on Oak and Western, and they go, well, that's my church. And I say, well, I've been pastor here for 5 years and I haven't seen you, so I'm not sure. I mean,
I'm not sure that's your church.
Well, that's what I said too. Is I think it might be. There's a couple Our Redeemers in town. I think she might be thinking of a different Our Redeemer, because we didn't even have a picture of her in any of the annuals from up to 10 years ago. So
okay,
I think it could have been a mistake, but that does happen where people are like, well, that's the church I go to, and I was like, well, I haven't seen you. They have this mindset that that's my church and there's no need for me to go there whatsoever.
Right. I went there once, so therefore I'm a member.
Yeah, exactly. And then maybe I have to tack onto this, and I might ask you what you think. I know what I think. The nature of COVID right now, and there's a lot of people who say to me that staying home and watching the service via online is just as good as going to church. And I would say, well, I've never seen an instance in the entire scriptures, Old Testament or New Testament, where anybody wrote that it was acceptable, or even it just didn't happen. You never see anyone watching worship as a spectator. Worship by nature is something that you're involved in. Right? And so you can't like tune in from somewhere else and kind of like be involved in it. It really necessitates your being physically involved in it as you gather together. Now, I think the online stuff was good for a while, in that we weren't sure where this COVID thing was going to go. But the thing that frustrates me is that this online thing is held up as it's as good as worshiping as we always have for the last 2,000. We could even go further if you count Old Testament worship as well. We've done this for thousands of years this way, and suddenly we're going to say that watching it behind a screen is just as good as. It isn't. It just isn't.
Yeah, it's not. You don't receive the sacrament through your video screen.
You can't. You're right.
Now I was watching a church online last week. I was researching a church that one of my members is actually attending, and So I watched one of their services, and at the beginning he said, everybody at home, get your bread or your crackers and your wine or your juice and have it out. So when it comes time, I will consecrate the elements, and you participate at home. And I thought, what a joke.
Yeah,
That's absolutely ridiculous. You can't, I mean, you don't see that anywhere in scripture
no.
where they tell you stay home and worship.
And there's several CTCR documents. For those people at home who don't know, that's the Commission on Theology and Church Relations, and so these are kind of folks who put out maybe doctrinal statements on current day issues that we deal with.
Yes.
And you go across the board, even Roman Catholics were dealing with this issue to a certain extent, and we're all in agreement that this is not how the sacrament is done. The Lord grabs elements in His midst and amongst the people. The whole reason why there's elements to be grabbed in the first place, in other words, the only reason there's bread and wine to be had is because they were celebrating together the Passover meal.
Right.
Right. I mean, so like they were. It happens in the circumstance of them being gathered together for this covenantal meal, and then Jesus kind of changes it and makes it new going forward.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can say then that, well, it's okay now for us to completely delineate the circumstances of how the sacrament came to be, the elements that Jesus grabs up and he says for the whole group that's sitting there, right? He says, I'm making this covenant now to you. This is my bread, this is my body. I'm sorry, this is my body, this is my blood. I don't know how you can deny all that and then just say like, well, this is okay to do this via this manner. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it makes no sense to me either. And you know, I don't ever remember thinking when I was younger that when I was going out into the field, because I'd walk in the fields. We lived right on the edge of town. Right across the street from us was a field, a plowed field. You know, they raise crops there. And I would walk in that field in the spring and fall, especially when there were no crops there either anymore or yet. And I would talk to Jesus and I would take my Bible with me, but I never ever thought of that as worship.
Yeah, you know, I can.
You know, I mean, I was just out finding comfort in the Lord with His Word and prayer. You know,
there's beautiful places in creation that are amazing and make you think about God, but you know, a fish is not going to jump out of the lake and tell me about Jesus, and a tree is not going to bend down and offer me the sacrament. That's just not how it works.
Right. And you know, when people say, well, I can worship in my boat. Well, that's true, you can.
But you're not going to be worshiping Jesus.
Huh?
You're not going to be worshiping Jesus, though.
Well, no. Let's assume you're going to be worshiping Jesus. You can worship in a boat, but that's not the purpose you're there for.
Well, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
You can, but you don't.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
You can have a pastor out there with you. In fact, I know a pastor. Don. Is it Don? Dan Delmcke.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever meet him?
I have met him. Yes.
He goes up into Canada fishing every summer with a group, and every morning at 5 o'clock in the morning they begin with a worship in their boats together on the lake.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's actually, he has a liturgy put together and they sing hymns and then they go about their fishing. So it can be done. It's just not
right
normally.
I've got plenty of members, or I've had this conversation where people say, well, I'll just read the Bible at home. And so my go-to answer to that has been, as I've gotten older in ministry, is I said, okay, well, when's the last time you opened up that Bible and read it at home? Yeah. And you're going to find out that it's been weeks, if not months, if not years.
Right. And then again, Scripture doesn't say salvation comes through reading, not that it can't. Right. What does it say? Through hearing the word.
Yeah.
Hearing the good news about Jesus.
I just point out that, like, that's all fine and good to say, but the reality is you're not. And the one good thing the church is doing week to week is that if you only are going to worship on Sunday morning, you're basically living a starvation diet, but at least you're living a starvation diet as opposed to nothing, right? You're getting
Right.
you're getting
You're
one,
receiving enough to keep you going for the rest of the week.
exactly. You should be doing more than that, but that's enough. Whereas if you completely cut yourself off from the church, you're not even getting enough to support your faith and keep it alive. I
Right.
wanted to read this to you. It's a Martin Luther quote that I actually saw. I think is perfect for this moment. So it says, "No man should be alone when he opposes Satan. The church and the ministry of the word were instituted for this purpose, that hands may be joined together and one may help another."
Yes. Yes. Great quote.
This is the church.
Yes.
This is what we do. And I get frustrated because people think that church attendance for me is signing off an attendance sheet. I want to have perfect records. And that's not it at all. I have a legitimate concern about your spiritual welfare. And
Right.
when you're away from the word and sacrament, when I can't feed you as your shepherd regularly, I get concerned about you.
Yep. Yep.
But
And a lot of people don't understand that today, that, that this is where you're fed spiritually, and it's not, if even if you go to a church that's a different denomination than ours, yes, you're getting the word, but you're getting incorrect teaching.
I would agree with
And
that.
that's going to eventually filter into you.
Yes. Agreed.
So for a time, if you have to do that, okay. And I was just talking, and I said the really the only excuse for that, for attending a non LCMS church, if you're an LCMS member, is that's the only church in 50 miles, and I need the word, I need the sacrament. What they teach about it is not what I believe, but I need it regardless.
Yeah.
And so that's where I have to go to get it.
My friends, Janikes, live down in the South, and
Mhm.
Lutheran churches down South can be few and far between.
Yes.
So they had those kind of issues. They talked to, Heidi Janicke would talk about that a lot. The distances between Lutheran churches, in Alabama are a long ways apart. It can be tough.
Yeah. When we had our 5 kids, because we have 5, and when we had them, and they were little, and I was working at 3M, we went to church 45 miles away to get to a church, an LCMS church, that had Sunday school, and because we wanted our kids in Sunday school. Our twins were, when we moved there, our twins were like a year old. And, people say, but it's so hard to get my 2 kids ready. No, it's not. You can't tell me that, because I've been there with 5 kids.
My wife
and we went every Sunday.
Yeah. My wife gets 6 kids ready every Sunday morning. So
Yeah.
whenever someone gives me that excuse, I can't get them ready and can't get them to church, I just say, my wife does it with 6 kids every Sunday.
By herself.
Yeah, by herself. That's exactly right, because I'm not there.
Because you're already at church getting stuff done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. The excuses, and you know what? With the thing that's kind of I'm a little afraid of now is that with COVID, it just seems like there are some folks who are on the outer peripheral edges of our congregations who I think this is just going to be their reason for being gone. At least, I think we have problems with summer attendance as it is, but this is going to be their excuse for not showing up again until next fall. And that's not how this works. This isn't something that gets to be shortchanged because you have summer plans. That's not how this works.
Right.
In fact, if you knew Christ was coming tomorrow, what would be more important to you, being in church or being on your summer vacation? So I think it's a reflection of where are your store up for yourself treasures in heaven. Actually, wake up every day, maybe thinking this could be the day that Christ is going to return. Maybe I ought to be found in the fields, found at work, found, I've been reading a lesson a lot lately where he says, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith? Will he find anyone who still trusts? So, I don't know. Let's shift gears for a minute.
Sure.
What are I'll let you answer this any way you want to go. What do you think are the greatest opportunities, or what is your greatest joy in ministry right now?
Oh, okay, I'm going to go with my greatest joy. And that is, and I've only been able to do this once in the last several months because people just weren't allowed in the hospital. But when someone is on their deathbed and I can give them their final communion with their family present and have them receive the sacrament together at the end of their life. That's the greatest joy there is for me.
Yeah, it's powerful.
And real close second to that is any baptism.
Yeah.
You know.
Agreed. There's something to giving someone their last communion or being with them as they pass that really makes you think about this is what shepherding is. You baptize them and then you're there at the end. Yep. And like we said at the very beginning, the ministry is God's.
Yes.
So something I did as a young man, as a baptism, some other young man's going to come along and he is going to be there when this person passes away.
Right.
And to God be the glory.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I had a family of members down in Missouri when I was there. The father of the family, the eldest of the ones, the eldest alive, he was actually in the hospital and he was on a BiPAP machine. I don't know if you know what that is, but it actually breathes for you.
Right.
But it's a mask that they put on. And he himself decided he was tired of that and he didn't want it anymore. And so the family called me and had me go from Missouri up to Omaha, which is where he was in the hospital. And I did the service, the commendation of the dying. You've probably used that.
Yes.
And then after that, I gave them all communion. The whole family was in the room. And in fact, it was such a wonderful thing to see that they all had tears as they were taking communion, not because their father was dying, but because they were joyful that they were receiving for one last time together the sacrament, and so what we did is when I consecrated the elements, I served him first, and he took off the mask himself. I mean, he was able to do that. He took the mask off, and I gave him the elements, and he received Holy Communion, and then I gave everyone else their communion. As I was giving everyone, he left the mask off then. He took it off his whole face. As I was giving communion to the rest of them and they were receiving it, he passed away.
So he literally crossed the veil of the sacramental feast while you were doing the sacrament.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes. What a glorious day that was to be involved in that.
Yeah, because he celebrated, he took the body and blood of Christ before he passed, and then he passed in the banquet feast of the Lamb.
Walked into it and saw the body and blood of the body of Christ right there, live and in full glory.
Right.
And
that's amazing.
That's got to be, I think, the best moment for me in my ministry so far.
Speaking on this, maybe drilling down a little bit, you've served. Now I don't know about Mountain City, but you started off in the Tri-Point Parish and then Delmont and Tripp. They're also small rural communities, small communities.
Yes.
What are some of the challenges right now in small rural communities to do ministry?
Well, there are several challenges. By the way, Parish there. Okay, so I did have 3 congregations in Missouri when I first got there.
Oh, okay.
And then about 3 months after I got there, the flood of 2011 hit, and 2 of the 3 congregations had 6 feet of water in them for 3 months. So we actually ended up closing all the churches and merging into a new one and doing a building project and all that while I was there. But the biggest challenge really is, and well, I think there are two of them. One of them is that I can't get people to realize that they are the church.
How
You
so?
know, well, let's take finances for example. When people see the churches struggling, like, I mean, our churches are spending more than they're bringing in, and fortunately they have funds in reserve to do that. The one in Delmont is holding its own. It's not digging into any funds, I don't think, at this point yet. But the other one over at Tripp is, and what I hear when they talk about that is, I hear things like, where's the money going to come from? Where, how is this, what are we going to do? Who can we find to help us to keep this church open? And I look at them and I say, you're it. If you want the church to keep going to serve you, you're the one that has to open up your wallet and increase what you give.
Yeah,
And I know that's harsh,
yeah.
but that's the reality.
No, I don't think so. I was actually thinking of a tweet that Pastor Hans Feiney put out, and he was kind of pleading with young people, and he's like, young people, if you want to have a church to take your kids to at some point someday, you've got to support it. You've got to actually be there from week to week, or else it won't be there. They're all struggling. They're all going to go under, and it's going to be like we talked about, like it is kind of sometimes down south. You won't have an LCMS church within 50 miles of you because no one supported them when they needed to be supported.
Right. And now we have in South Dakota, especially, and in other states, it's not just South Dakota, but we have churches that are 10, 15 miles apart. They're not in a dual parish situation or whatever, but they both are in need of more support and more membership, but nobody wants to close their church to make that happen.
Yeah.
And I understand, not wanting to close your church. I get that. But I also understand that, these are different times, and it's time that we need to figure out how to do some of these things without overtaxing our pastors.
I think I've actually talked about this a bunch of times, that what happens is that the memories that happen inside the church become synonymous with the church building itself.
Yes.
And so then any attempt at improving, maybe closing if that's necessary, tearing down, or maybe a large remodel where the sanctuary is going to change extensively. All these various, whenever there's some kind of challenge towards the building project, towards the building itself, it becomes wrapped up in all the emotions that have gone with the services that have happened in the building, and we lose sight of that. The church even the building only exists to extend the reach of God and to be a place, a pivot point for ministry to go forward. And if we lose sight of that, then we have these kind of problems crop up. You're right, though. It's a terribly, terribly difficult thing to, I talk about it pretty roughly. I'm kind of blunt sometimes. It's tough to be the guy to take the church out back behind the woodshed and put it to bed with a shovel. But sometimes you're right. Like for example, right now, I think we're going to have a very tricky next 15, 20 years with the seminaries because of decreased enrollment at both. And they're very, very expensive campuses to keep running. Yes. So do you just continue to pour millions of dollars into both of the campuses instead of maybe consolidating them to educate record low number of students?
Right.
I and I'm not saying I have an answer to that, but the fact that we're saying that there's no way that we can close or consolidate either one of them, that's the problem. We become so tied to these facilities, we can't do what's right for the kingdom of God and for
Right.
the synod as a whole.
Yeah. 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 And people have this idea that one is more conservative than the other, one is more outreach oriented than the other. And while that may be true in some cases, I've seen a lot of great pastors come out. You know, I came from Fort Wayne. I've seen a lot of great pastors come out of St. Louis. I've seen a lot of bad pastors come out of St. Louis. I've seen a lot of great pastors come out of Fort Wayne. I've seen a lot of bad pastors come out of Fort Wayne. You know,
Well,
and
the issue really doesn't. I mean, I don't necessarily know if it's in our purview today, but suffice to say that um, there. I think that there is some place where, Jesus says, consider the costs.
yes,
Do you go to war before calculating how many soldiers you have, or do you do that first and then decide to sue for peace? Perhaps we should
right,
look, instead of always talking about, even today with how the government spends money. We're trying very hard to make sure that a certain generation is very happy right now, and we're giving no thought to the generations that come 20 years from now.
right,
We're
right,
giving very little thought. In fact, we all should be putting in place systems and structures, savings, all kinds of things in place, not for ourselves, but for the generations that are to come behind us. That's what I don't know. That would be maybe a little better altruistic wise than the way we go about things, where someone better make me happy right now, or else you're going to be in trouble politically or
physically.
yeah,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
there's a lot of that going on too. And this idea of the stimulus thing that came out of the government, um, whether you agree with it or not, whether you think it's going to help or not, myself as an economist, I don't see the help, because economically, people weren't spending that money on things they need. They were going out and buying things with it. All of a sudden, about a month ago, you started seeing, you know, all of a sudden, a lot of big TVs were sold,
Oh, yeah.
all that kind of stuff. It's not stuff you need, it's not stuff that you need to survive. Let's put it that way. But I also didn't ever hear of anybody sending the check back to the government either.
Well, we had a couple people from the congregation who are doing pretty well. They actually came in and said, "We don't need this. Do you know of some place we could put it that would be good?" So I've had that happen a couple of times, but for the most part, yeah, I've seen amongst my congregation too a lot of home improvement projects and everything else.
Right.
And in fact, I'm not sure if it's the case, but we even saw an uptick in giving for a while. Perhaps some people were taking the money that they received from stimulus and giving it to the church too. I don't know, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think long term it's not necessarily good. I worry about what kind of country my kids will inherit, or more, or even worse, what kind of country my grandkids will inherit.
Exactly. Yeah. My grandkids are the ones that I'm concerned about, and as far as my wife and I are concerned, Jesus can't come back too soon. So,
Well, you and me both. I think about it every day. I try to to put life in perspective. I try to remind myself. I get up and I just ask myself the question, perhaps today. Maybe today is the day.
yeah.
And then I go to bed and I say maybe tomorrow. And so I'm always trying to kind of living that way. Although I don't know, maybe I don't think far enough into the future sometimes. But
Right.
well, hey, regardless of what's going on in our congregations, Jesus is in control, and
Yes.
He is our Lord, and He is going to return to take us to be with Him. I'd love to ask you some rapid fire fun questions to close.
Sure.
That'd be
Go
all
ahead.
right.
Give
So,
it a try.
what is your favorite movie?
I missed that question. You were breaking up for a minute.
Oh, sorry. What is your favorite movie?
My favorite movie? Um, Man, there's so many of them. Um, I, I would probably have to go with Star Wars, the original, the episode 4.
There you go.
I saw that.
I'm curious, since you had so many in your mind, what's your number 2?
I can't say that. My wife would not be happy with me.
Okay.
But no, I can't say it. It's Animal House. It's Animal House.
Not a probably a very Christian movie, but hysterical. Yeah.
No.
I've seen it. It is a hysterical movie.
Yeah.
All right. Favorite. We'll get back on the track now here. Favorite book of the Bible, or I'll take your favorite Bible verse.
Well, I can give you both, actually.
Okay.
My favorite book of the Bible is John, the Gospel of John. And my favorite passage is John chapter 19, verse 30.
Do you have it on the top of your head?
Yeah, Jesus bowed he said, "It is finished." Actually, he shouted, if you look at the Greek correctly, "It is finished." And then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
Tetelestai, that's good stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. That's a good one. Okay, what about a favorite, a recent book that you enjoyed reading? And it doesn't have to be a religious one, just maybe a fiction book, a recent book you enjoyed reading.
Right now, I've been enjoying Chemnitz's works. That's what I've been reading recently.
I've been meaning to reread Christology for forever. I should pull that off the shelf and do that. That's an excellent book.
Yeah.
For anybody who at home is not registering, Martin Chemnitz, right, is
yes.
excellent. He's a latter Reformation scholar. So after Luther's gone, and after the kind of the Counter Reformation, Chemnitz was a writer, and he's very important for like the epitome and the formula of Concord.
Yes.
The latter parts of the Book of Concord. Really, he was really kind of dealing with things on both sides, both from Roman Catholics and from the new burgeoning Protestants as well. So
right.
he's just an excellent Lutheran resource. Everyone should read some Chemnitz.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Favorite food?
Spaghetti with meat sauce.
I like spaghetti.
I could eat that almost every meal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My wife makes an excellent meatball. She makes spaghetti and meatballs sometimes, and I mean she makes legit Italian-style meatballs. Ooh, that's good.
Yeah.
All right, this is a toughie. Cat or dog?
Dog.
All right. That's
not tough.
We just got a new kitten, and so Laura is a total dog person, but I'm a cat person.
Okay.
I grew up on the farm, on a dairy farm. We always had kittens around everywhere.
Oh yeah.
So I kind of grew up.
Yeah, kittens are cute, but they turn into cats.
See, this is true, but on a dairy farm, you don't see cats that often. They're always
you don't.
They're out doing things, right? The kittens are the things you see. So I should probably preface it by saying I don't really like cats. I like kittens. And who doesn't like kittens, right?
To me, I grew up with cats in the house my whole childhood. They get into everything and on everything, and nothing is, you can't have anything nice even on a shelf because they'll get to it. They're going to get to that shelf.
We have a golden doodle. We've always had poodle mixes because they don't shed.
Yep.
And now we've got a cat that probably will shed. I don't know how I'm going to deal with hair all over the place.
Hope you're not allergic, are you?
I don't think so, but I think my kids are. We're still sorting it out. I mean, not like they're not crazy allergic, but there's been an adjustment period for sure.
Yeah.
All right, one place that you would really like to visit.
Can it be visit or revisit?
Revisit, visit, either one.
I've got a couple in mind. I would like to visit the Holy Land again. I went there in 2009 with Pastor Noor. My wife and I did. That was when she was still healthy enough to be able to do that. She couldn't walk that much then, but because she needed hips replaced. But now she can't really walk at all, so she wouldn't be able to see most of it. But yeah, that's one place I'd love to revisit. In fact, as soon as we got home, we wanted to go back.
Yeah,
So,
I visit. You know, it's funny you say 2009. I was there in 2007.
okay.
And I agree. You know, going there once isn't enough. And in fact, when you go there once, it kind of informs you. Then you know all the places that you actually want to see. So then you'd like to go back and kind of do it all over again and see
Yeah,
all.
it makes, yeah. It's amazing how you're distracted when you're there the first time by so much, you get overloaded. And
Yes.
then if you go back a second time, I'm told, you you see it with new eyes because you're looking for the things that you noticed last time but didn't get time to really pay attention to.
Right.
You know, when we were in Israel, I took 4,500 pictures. And my wife was busy writing down the places we were seeing. So we really didn't see anything.
Because you had your eyes behind a camera.
I had my eyes behind a camera and she had her nose in the notebook trying to keep up. So
There is that sense you know you kind of feel it like I'm not going to get a chance to do this again, so I gotta you almost feel burdened by it. You have to just take everything in
yeah,
and it's too bad because then you don't really. I think the one thing I regret most about when I was there is we didn't spend enough time in the old city, just walking around.
oh,
Yeah, I would
you
have liked
didn't,
that.
did you go with Pastor Noor or?
No, we went on a separate trip, and our tour
Okay,
guide who was taking us around, he scheduled some time for the old city, but not enough. I didn't realize it then, but I realize it now. I would have
yeah.
liked to have walked around the old city some more.
Yeah, that probably would have been nice, see more stuff in the, but we did the Della Rosa,
Right.
you know. We saw the the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And we saw all that stuff in the old city. But yeah, you're right. We were in such a hurry to get to that so we wouldn't miss that, that we kind of zoomed by those places, you know, all those shops and everything
Right.
that are set up as tourist traps, basically. But I would have liked to have stopped at some of them and seen what's there. But overall, it was such a good experience, you know.
You know, I traveled a fair amount, and I would say to people, if you're going to travel, you know, get over that fear of being a tourist. You're a tourist.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, and the thing is, if you're so afraid of looking like a tourist, you're never going to enjoy yourself. Like,
right.
be a good tourist, be a conscientious tourist, a patient one, a kind one, but don't
Yeah,
be afraid to do touristy things because that's why they're there, and you should enjoy yourself. You know, we went to
yes,
Bethlehem, we went to the Church
yeah,
of the Nativity, and then we went
yep,
to an olive wood store, and it's a total
yes,
touristy thing. And I
yep,
loved it. I loved looking around
yep.
that olive wood store, and I bought some stuff. And I'm so glad I did. I don't feel guilty about being a tourist.
Yeah, I've got several things that came from there from an olive wood store. In fact, Pastor Noor always goes to the same one because the guy that owns it is a Christian.
Yeah, well, that's pretty cool,
Um,
actually. The reason we went to the guy we went to was because the tour guide they had a mutual agreement with one another. But
oh, I'm sure. Yeah, a
yeah,
lot of that's what the tour guides are all about. Is
yeah.
that you know?
You know, I
Um,
think really when you think about it, being a tourist is a high compliment. You're basically saying your country and your homeland is so beautiful that we want to come see it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so go there, pay the people that you're visiting a compliment, be courteous, and don't there is that tendency of Americans sometimes to travel and not want to embrace the culture that they're in. That's unfortunate. But I
yeah,
found, for the most part, American tourists usually are on the whole, are pretty good. You know, I think it's kind of a stereotype that people talk
Right.
about them being bad or whatever. So, hey, I know you probably got things to get on to. It's getting late. You probably got some things to do. But I thank you so much. I've already gone over our time. I know I asked you 45 minutes. I've already taken an hour of your time. Thank you so much for sitting down and talking with us today. I'm sure my people from my congregation will love it, and they'll enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I'll look forward to seeing you at Pastors
Yeah.
Conference this fall upcoming. And
Yeah.
I'll make sure to say hello to your daughter when I see her.
You do that, and then she's let's see, she's getting older, and we tease her a lot because of that, but that's okay. We have such a good relationship with all of our children that the family we have is the complete opposite of what I grew up in, and I thank God for that.
Yeah, in fact, I
Every
was
day.
very surprised when you told me your story because that is not reflected in what I sense of the relationship between your daughter and yourself and your wife. So,
Yeah, our relationship is blessed by God. I mean, I am a full believer that God gave me my wife to bring me back to Him.
Hmm.
I cannot be unconvinced of that because I was on a path of destruction when I was 17 years old, and I met this godly, although rebellious, 17-year-old LCMS girl, to whom church was very important, and so it took a while, but she brought me back to God.
yeah.
And I fully believe he did that. I was told by her cousin that the day after she met me, she told him that I was the guy she was going to marry.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with you 100%. If there's any young men out there wondering how they can make their lives better, get married and let your wife soothe your soul and make you a better man.
yes, absolutely.
Blessings on the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Godspeed to
You
you. And
too.
you know what? Also, this blessings to your ministry in Tripp and in Delmont, especially. I
Thank
have
you.
a special place in my heart for those Delmont folks. I haven't visited them one time before. Nice people and very appreciative. So,
Yeah.
greet them for me as
You
well.
came out and did our mission Sunday.
Yeah, it was a very nice thing, and they were very courteous and very nice people. So
Yes. Yeah.
glad to interview you. And Zion, the newest structure is just gorgeous too. Whoever
Yes.
made the plans and did the work did a very good job.
Yeah. He's actually the same architect that I believe that did the new school for the Lutheran school
Oh,
in Sioux
Steve did
Falls.
that.
I
Steve
think
Jastrom.
so.
Oh, I didn't know
Yes.
that.
Yes. Steve Jastrom.
Oh
Yep.
my goodness, he's doing
Yep.
stuff everywhere.
Yep.
All
He's
right.
the one that laid the plans for this and helped them out, and yeah.
Good stuff. All right, sir.
Good.
Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for your time.
God bless you.
All
Thank
right.
you. Bye.